Hey guys, this is Eric Vento with Government to Private. We have Terry Owens here with us tonight. Super excited about this. If you're not already aware, or this is your first time tuning in, this podcast is meant to show you all the different ways that you can transition successfully from the government side of the house to the corporate world. There's just not one or two ways, there's numerous different types of ways. And only by learning about the experiences of others do we get a sense of perspective about how each journey is and how you can potentially take the lessons learned and transition successfully on your own. Perry, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Hey man, I'm honored to be on. Thanks a lot for having me, Eric.
Absolutely, brother. So you come from a former law enforcement background, just like I do. And I can't wait to hear, just about your experience. I've listened to you on other podcasts before, and although I wasn't able to attend GSX this past year, I heard rave reviews about what you did there, and I'd just love to hear a little bit about your law enforcement career and what you did there.
Yeah, so it's funny, you think back and you look at your past, and even before law enforcement, I knew this was kind of the industry I wanted to get into. And I mean, it started back way back with J.C. Penney, Jacques Penney, or whatever you want to call it, and chasing shoplifters. And you know, at the time, I thought it was a great idea, but you look back and you're like, boy, I was stupid. You look back and you think, man, that was just really, really dangerous. Encountering those people, you're not armed, and you don't have you don't have the training that you have in law enforcement and things like that. So even before law enforcement, I kind of knew I wanted to get into the industry, and I had an opportunity with the Kansas City Police Department, and man, I really did. I had a great time there. I did, just right about 15 years with KCPD, and I did everything from patrol to investigations, and I was a sergeant, and I got to supervise a proactive squad. And you think back to all the interesting things you do, and when you talk to people that don't encounter that world all the time, they look at you like they're like, there's no way that can happen. And I was like, no, it can totally happen that way. And you see all these different things. But towards the end, towards the end of that 15 years, I really felt like I had so much more potential. In the government world, it's really a defined path. You do X, you do Y, you do Z, and that's really about it. You go from being an officer to a detective to a sergeant to a captain to a major, deputy chief or chief or whatever you want to do, but that's it. And so I started thinking about, well, what do I really want to do? Do I want to stick with this, or do I want to venture out and take that leap, which by the way was absolutely terrifying. And anybody who tells you that it's not terrifying, they're lying to you. But back in like 2010, I met this guy named Steve Brown. He was the director of global security for a huge engineering firm in Kansas City, and he was part of ASIS. And I always kind of kept that on the back burner, going, "Oh, maybe I'll join this group, maybe I won't." And right around that 2020-ish, I had a couple close calls. There were a lot of people that worked for KCPD that had been shot. Um, I started thinking about, okay, what's my long-term goal going to be? Where's this going? And I sat down with my wife, which by the way is so important, including that family, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But I started looking at, well, I can't just make that leap. That's just kind of foolish. So I started studying for the CPP, and I will tell you, Eric, I have never felt so stupid in my entire life. I thought about it, afterwards, going, man, there's so much material that you never think about as a cop. You're like, who gives a crap what is the difference between a passage set and a office lock and a classroom lock or a store? Who cares? But
Right.
in the real world, it means a lot, and you don't realize how little you know until you start doing it. And I passed my CPP, and by the grace of God, I passed it on the first time because I really did not want to take that again. I will tell you quite honestly that I was so nervous. I was probably, I mean, I probably had pit stains everywhere because I was so nervous thinking about that. But I passed it, and um, I started applying for jobs. I was like, you know what? I've got my CPP, I've got my law enforcement. Man, I'm going to start applying for jobs. And there's nothing like a good batch of failures to really humble you. So I was like, what do you mean? Why am I getting all these rejections? What is happening here? And it's not that they, kind of like you talking about, it's not that they were rejecting me. It's that they were rejecting what I was giving them. And
Yeah.
so, I went and had somebody, look at my resume, and I was like, man, that resume that I put out before, yeah, it was pretty pitiful. Like, you look at the grand scheme of things, you're like, that was pretty awful. But you start talking to people, and um, there was a job with a major tech company that was in Omaha, and I just wasn't in love with it. I really didn't want to move. I was on it, and I was very wishy washy about it, and I'm sure that didn't come across well during the final interview. But I was sitting at the desk sergeant's area with another guy named Bruce, and he'll know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to show him this podcast sometime. But I'm sitting next to him, and I walk by, and I walk away, and he comes back. He's like, "Hey, there's some guy from Facebook on the line." And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And I totally thought he was screwing with me. And this, so I pick up the phone, and it was Carlos Francisco, who I had read his book. I'd read his book, and uh, he's like, "Hey, this is Carlos Francisco from Meta." I was like the author?" He's like, "Yeah." So, uh, you think about that. So they were coming to town to start on a data center, and during the conversation, we went to dinner one night, and he talked about contract guard service. And as a cop, all you think in security, you're like contract guards, whatever. And I was like, you know what? I need to know more about it. And so, a guy named Mike Benton, who we call the Godfather of the CPP, he has helped so many people pass their CPP. He put me in touch with a guy named Ryan Smith, who owns Titan Security. And I was like, "Hey, Ryan, I need to know more about this contract guard service." And during he agreed to meet up with me for coffee, and man, we had a great conversation. But he's like, "Hey, do you have a resume?" I was like, "Yeah." And so he sent it on to somebody that was hiring, and that's how I ended up at my current company. Is just those connections, just like you talk about in other
Love it.
podcasts, you talk about all the time. But that's kind of my story, man. I went from you know not being able to understand what's going on to holy crap, we went to like light speed, and well, I guess it'd be a light speed.
That's awesome, man. I love it. One of the things, this kind of dovetails with what we were talking about before we hit record is every single person's story is so unique and different. And that's one of the beautiful things about not only like where we are in life, but also the joy that we get in helping others accomplish the same thing. And, I sit here and I listen to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people, and they all have different stories, but they're looking for the same thing, and I love really like your story about how networking and relationship building, and it's all about who was able to give you the job that you're currently in, and so in your current role, what are your responsibilities?
uh Everything. Not just so uh no so I'm the first person in the role for my company, and they had some contract guard service and all that stuff, but there wasn't a whole lot of, it was a lot of security by committee. So going through and ironing out things, getting things straightened out, getting emergency planning going, making sure the access control was up to snuff, making sure that the camera systems are up to snuff. So for example, I have multiple locations across the country. Well, now What I do is the access control. We have it across the country. We don't have a bunch of different systems. It all is one. And creating that physical security standard, you don't realize how important that is until you are part of an organization where they depend on you. If there's a failure, it's not on anybody else, it's on me. And now that that's really my world, um, my wife used to make fun of me all the time because we'd go to the restaurant and I'd be picking out people. I'm like, oh yeah, that dude, look how he's acting. Now I'm looking at cameras going, oh my gosh, look at that wire hanging out. You know,
Why do they still
that
have
that
analog? What is going on
yeah,
here?
that's some Mandala technology. Oh my gosh, what is going on here? Look at that lock. There's a I can't remember his for Asa Abloy, Benji. He calls him Benji the door dork. And I always
I
see him
follow that guy. Yep.
yeah, posting funny things. But that's what I kind of feel like. I'm like, wow, I've turned into a security nerd. Oh my gosh, what had happened to me? But I mean, it's been a really interesting transition. Uh, but the fact that if you don't go out and you don't talk to people and you don't meet people and you don't put yourself out there, then there's no reason for you to even be looking, because
Yeah.
that's what people are looking for. Um, there's a guy named Chris Walker. He recently passed away, but he was a professor at TCU. He wrote the business principles, and he talks about that people leaving law enforcement, they come into they come into the corporate world with a hammer and they're just trying to break everything. And the intentions are really good, but how you go about it can make all the difference in the world.
So, one thing I want to, I guess, focus on is, you went from a sergeant at, Kansas City to a director of security for a company. What was that transition like going from a sergeant to the number one security guy at a company? Like, how quickly did you have to learn things, and quickly learn or quickly transition your mindset to, okay, how do I do this job at an executive level when I don't have any experience doing a lot of it beforehand?
Yeah, so the biggest smack for reality for me was when an incident happened and one of the executives asked me, well, what do you think about this? I'm like, holy crap. Oh, they want me to answer. Not they want an opinion. No, they
Right.
want me to answer. They want my answer. Um, so I think that it was kind of the company I work for. They did a really amazing job of, uh, kind of doing those baby steps into that. And that is not every company, and not everybody's going to have that experience. But the experience I got was really good because that company had never had security, like somebody that was in this position before. So it was my role to take them in those baby steps. So I at least had the opportunity to grow as the company was adjusting to having that type of security role. Um, but it was really weird. For probably the first 6 months, I was like, "Well, what am I gonna do?" Like, there's gotta be and no, there was plenty to do, but you think about in law enforcement where you're supervising multiple people, you could be supervising multiple functions. Well, here you're going, "Okay, well, what all needs to be done," and you walk around and you don't realize what you're looking at. You can read it in manuals all you want, um, but fortunately I had a VP of IT security that was kind of introduced me to some of the cyber side, making sure things are on the proper VLANs. And that's a term that's a I'll tell you, that was a term that was I was like, I'm sorry, V, what the hell are we talking about here? Where you're talking about VLANs and you're talking about LPA or POLP, the
Right.
principal of privilege, depending on, or at least privileged access, depending on who you're talking to. So adapting to some of that terminology and adapting, uh, to some of that, some of those concepts, you do it in law enforcement, but you're not really in charge of it.
Yeah.
And in this case, it's, you have the cyber side, but on the physical side, it's my responsibility to protect somebody where they never even make it to the cyber side.
So are you primarily responsible for physical security, or are you transitioning to a converged?
No, I have the physical security. So that is my primary role. I've just been incredibly fortunate to have somebody that, is in that cybersecurity role that has kind of helped me along, um, introduced me to some of those other concepts that otherwise you wouldn't be able to do. Which, I mean, if you're transitioning from law enforcement, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to manage a contract guard service. I mean, that's not that comes with its own set of problems, but it's not as bad as, I shouldn't say not as bad, not as difficult as, oh, I'm managing contract guard service. Plus, I'm managing an access control system. Plus, I'm managing cameras. Oh, hey, by the way, we've got locations across the United States, and we got to figure that out. And hey, we're opening offices in other locations, so good luck. No, I'm just kidding. No, you start thinking about those aspects, and you just don't ever get it in law enforcement. Um,
Mm,
so
yeah,
having to take that step back and learn from others, because you'll sit around the table and it's not, oh, you may not be the smartest guy in the room. No, you're not the smartest guy in the room. You need to
yeah,
listen to other people that are professionals in the industry, and having that Rolodex to go, hey, Mike, hey, Carlos, hey, um, hey, Roy, all these people, hey, John, what's this? Have you ever run into this situation before? I think that is the absolute key. Is if you don't have that Rolodex of resources, then that would have made it. I mean, it would have made it damn near impossible.
yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more. And it kind of leads me into my next question, which is, beyond the personal relationships, what other resources are you utilizing to stay abreast of emerging trends, upskill yourself, learn more about the scope of your remit, et cetera?
Yeah. So as you're as you're looking at product, as you're looking at things that are trending, um, being careful of who you listen to is really important, because there's a lot of people in the industry that are out there to sell you whatever crap they can sell you. So making sure you're relying on, I mean, sales, they will sell you whatever. I mean, if you're willing to buy it, they will give you whatever you want. Um, but taking that time, like for example, like the Fusion Center puts stuff out, so you need to pay attention to what Fusion Centers are talking about. You need to be, ASIS puts out a ton of news. ATAP, which is American Association of Threat
Assessment
Professionals, or
professionals. Yeah,
yeah, that's it. They put out articles, putting out reading some of the cybersecurity awareness too, because there's so much crossover now between the physical and cyber side.
mm,
And I would be lying to you if I said that I understood, a tenth of the stuff that's going on with the cyber side. Um, but you have to at least understand some of the terminology,
yep.
to know what's going on. So, I mean, reading from credible sources like ASIS, ATAP, I can't remember, CISA put stuff out. They will put out a lot of good active shooter stuff. Secret Service puts stuff out. Um, they put out classes, and you think in law enforcement you do your annual in service, and they talk about active shooters. Well, you only talk about, oh, well, here's the active shooter and here's how to deal with it. You don't think about all the business continuity of how do we get the business back up and working. Who is going to be notified? How are we going to notify our employees? Who's going to notify them? What are we going to do after? Because that's just the start of it. How are we
Right,
going to bring people back to work? They're not going to feel safe. They're not going to feel like, their world has just been absolutely rocked. How are we going to, bring all that together and make it work? It's kind of the same thing with emergency planning right now. Um, nobody. Nobody can really even speak to some of the atrocities that are going on over in the Middle East right now. I mean, you can't plan for stuff like that. I mean,
Mm.
that's craziness right now. Um, but you look at stuff like that and you're like, oh my gosh, we need to at least be preparing as much as we can for anything that could even quasi happen in our region like that.
Yeah, one thing that you quickly learn when you transition into any type, or in most types of corporate security roles, is what duty of care is, and how in law enforcement, usually you have some type of protection, which is qualified immunity, and in the corporate world, you don't have anything. Not only are you criminally liable in a lot of countries for your failure to act or your failure to prepare and plan, but you're also civilly liable. And there's regulators and there's auditors and there's so many different types of people to appease and ensure that your programs are operating at best practices. And you're exactly right. The geopolitical tensions and the situations around the globe, but also here in the U.S., constantly force us to reevaluate our programs and ensure that they are providing the best level of service and care for our employees, our facilities, et cetera. Yeah, I could talk about that for a long time. But one thing I wanted to kind of circle back to is, when you were transitioning out of the PD, was there anything that you did that you know you wish you wouldn't have, or didn't have the type of result that you were thinking it was going to?
So there's two things. One was learning terminology beforehand. Like you mentioned something, duty of care. Duty of care is a big one. Premise liability, understanding more than just the criminal terminology. That is an absolute must. You have to understand a lot of that. But the one of the other things that I wish I would have done earlier is consulted people about like resume. Because you're going to be, you did a podcast with somebody who talked about the ATS, the Society for Human Resource Managers. Um, Knowing those things is so big. I wish I would have consulted somebody about that long before. And then when you're talking to a recruiter, well, what to say, what not to say, how to make yourself not sound um, like you're going to come in with a hammer. That you can be personable. They're,
Yep.
so I see all these people on LinkedIn, and Eric, you have to see it too. That they'll hit me up on LinkedIn, and the number one thing I see pop up is a picture of them in uniform with their flag in the background. And hey, I love the U.S. I'm very proud to have been in law enforcement for so long. But they're not looking to hire. They're not looking to hire a federal agent. They're not looking to hire a police officer. They're looking to hire somebody to be a crisis manager. They're looking to hire somebody who can handle um, that they can look to when crisis situations come, because that's really what it's all about. Is
Yeah.
secure all security is a bunch of inconveniences, but mostly what you're there for is to give them direction and give them perspective when a crisis happens, and that way they can rely on it. But I and I cannot remember who it was, because I made that exact same mistake. Here I was. I had a picture of me in uniform with a, I think it was my promotion when I got promoted to being a sergeant. I was like, oh, this is a great picture. And someone's like, hey, by the way, that's not what we were looking for. I was like, what do you mean? And they explained it to me. I was like, I never would have thought about it like that. So getting perspective on things. But I learned a lot just from talking to people. I would go and connect with people, and I was so amazed how many people would just talk to you. It was crazy how many people were willing to talk to you. But if you never even bothered to reach out, yeah, you know, that's a missed opportunity. If you don't want it, then it's not going to be there.
Yeah. Absolutely. I talked to probably the major, like I would say 40% of my clients are in the patrol capacity. and the rest are at the SES, chief of police, or command staff level. And the patrol guys, I hear this constantly is like, well, no one wants my experience. And I'm like, well, police officers or police officer isn't a job title that people are searching for, you know, but investigator, crisis manager, business continuity analyst, plans officer, whatever the case may be, those are job titles that people in the corporate world are searching for. And if you look at your experience and then you help and someone can help you translate it to what it would be in the corporate world, then all of a sudden you realize that every single skill that you have is directly transferable to the private sector. It's just called something different. It's just in a different language, and that dovetails exactly with what you were talking about. People just have to recognize that, whether you've been in law enforcement for 5 years or 30, your mindset has to change. The way that you consider, your environment and the culture and the language, all of that has to shift. And yes, you can do it on your own, but it's so much more valuable and it's so much more, and at least in my opinion, it's a lot easier to engage people who have gone before you and who have made that journey to help you on your own journey and hopefully let you make a little fewer mistakes than you might have.
Yeah, and kind of to piggyback on what you were talking about. So I was thinking about this. I'm looking to the right, and I've got a bunch of challenge coins. And what I did is when I was getting ready to transition, is when people would talk to me, hey, by the way, go Chiefs, just so you know, and that will come into play just for a second. So in 2020, the Chiefs won the Super Bowl. Love it or hate it. I'm sorry for the 49ers fans. But we had the Kansas City Police Department made a Chiefs Super Bowl coin. And so when people would agree to talk to me, like I probably spent, probably $300 or something like that on getting these. I think I probably got 30 of them. But when people would agree to talk to me, I would say, "Hey, you know what? Thanks a lot for talking to me. Would you be willing to give me or send me your address so I can send you a coin?" And that small thing means so much to people. And you were talking about 40% of your people that are in patrol. I guarantee you those departments have coins. And I can look over here at these coins on my wall and I can tell you pretty much where I got every single one of them. And
Yeah.
you probably get a ton of them, but that small token means a lot to people, especially if it's something unique. It gives you that opportunity to brand and then follow up with them. After, hey, did you, because generally they'll send you, hey, thanks for the coin. Continue that conversation with them. Say, hey, in a month or so, would you be willing to chat again? Just a short conversation about whatever. Um, but if you make yourself stand out, those connections, that's the difference between you getting a job and being referred to a job and you sitting there being frustrated. So that's something that I did is I used those coins to my advantage. And that $300 that I spent on coins, holy crap, man! People pull that out all the time. I go visit cities. They're like, "Oh, do you remember when you sent that to me?" And in my mind, I'm like, "I don't remember that at all." But I guarantee they remember when I got it.
Yeah.
Kind of like I remember when I can go through, I can go through that collection. I can tell you pretty much every single one of those who gave them to me.
That's awesome. I love that. It's just a way to connect people, but it's also a way to build that relationship and to maintain it in some way, shape, or form. You mentioned earlier in our conversation about the importance of family, and especially when you're making that transition decision. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah. So the first time I talked to my wife, um, I was like, "Hey, you know what? I'm thinking that I may need to look into another career path." And she gave me that look like, "Are you out of your mind?" And it's mostly because I hadn't explained context. But for the last 15 years, that's what we did. We did law enforcement, and it's a way of life. That's how it is. But I sat down and talked to her about it. And I said, "Hey, I think that long term, this is probably better for me." and then she opened up about, "I'm glad you told me this because I've been keeping it to myself because of, I knew this was our career." She she told me all these different things about, all these worries she had and all this stuff that was going on. So including your family in the conversation is so key, because it is going to impact everybody. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be scary. You're going to be like, you think a couple weeks out and you're like, oh my God, what did I do? What, but you're like, what in the world did I just do? Which, it is scary. But if you have that family support and that understanding of why you're doing it, uh, like my wife was super supportive of it. Um, but I think a lot of it has to do with that open and honesty with that family. But I have talked to people that have tried to make that move um, without consulting their family, and it's
Never goes
yeah,
well.
that's no, it doesn't go well, and then a lot of times it will backfire, and like, hey, by the way, we're in Kansas City now. We're gonna move to St. Louis. Nothing against St. Louis, but I'm just use that as an example. Your family may not be down for that. Your family
Yeah.
may not want to make those moves. So for me, I've been incredibly blessed to have this opportunity in Kansas City. Uh, but depending on where you are, you may not have that opportunity. And if that is something that you need to look into, moving outside your area, those are hard conversations. But in having an actual honest conversation with that family is, um, that could be the make it or break it.
Yeah, I was thinking about my own transition, and as many of the listeners know, that my transition was not voluntary out of law enforcement. And you know I don't think, I mean, I've given a lot of podcasts over the years and a lot of talks and interviews about my own transition and the mental health struggles that came out of that. But I don't think I have ever talked about, the family decision making process, because, we weren't talking about, okay, well, what should we do from a, should we transition? Should we get out? We were talking about, like, well, what the hell do we do now? What does that look like? And it's I don't know, my mind's swirling a little bit right now, just because I'm walking down memory lane in my mind. But you know what you mentioned just kind of like reverberating in there, and it is absolutely so crucial. I mean, the family aspect is, at least for me, and I know for you, the most important aspect of our lives. And we have to involve them in making decisions or even evaluating decisions of this magnitude, because as much as it impacts us, it impacts them even more. So um how is the work life balance for your family now that you've transitioned out of law enforcement?
But it's interesting that you mentioned that because I was getting ready to piggyback on something you said. At some point in time, I'm pretty sure my wife's going to be like, "Hey, you know what? I'm used to you having my evenings free to go do whatever, go hang out with the kids or whatever it is. But now I'm home in the evenings, and it took a while to really adjust to that.
Yeah.
Because I worked PMs, I worked in the zone that I lived in, so I'd be able to stop by for dinner and tell the kids, "Hey, I love you," and have dinner with them. And they actually, if there was a sergeant that had to copy a call, they always used to get a kick out of that. They get on the radio and say 410A copies, and someone's like, "Did you just turn into like an 8-year-old girl? Because it sounds like an 8-year-old girl was on the radio." Uh, so we went from that to me being home every night, and I'm not gonna lie, it was just a very strange transition, and that took some talking through. Um, it took some talking through. Okay, well, what is reality now? my wife would go to work, and I'd have my mornings free to go jog around the neighborhood or go run errands or do whatever. And now they expect me to go to work and stuff. I'm like, what is this stuff? Uh, you, you think about it from that perspective. It's just a different mindset, and having those conversations with my family, having the ability to have that conversation with my family, that, hey, this is a little different. Let's adjust to it. I think it worked out well. It's worked out really well. Um, for the most part, most evenings are open, and I don't have to worry so much about, oh my gosh, hold on, let me count on the calendar whether I have this Saturday off. Well, okay, this is the fifth Saturday, week four, whatever it is. Um, so when you're working on a schedule like that, it's just a different dynamic. And now I'm like, oh my gosh, it's almost like you lose your purpose for a little bit, and um, you have to re-gauge what's important. So you have your family aspect, but it is not uncommon, and a lot of people I've talked to, you kind of feel like you lose your purpose for just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean it's a major mindset shift, and I tell I tell people all the time, especially the guys on the command side of the house, where they're like, "Hey, I'm hitting my 30, I'm hitting my 35, I'm looking to retire," and I always have to have like a expectation setting. Come to Jesus, call with him, like, "Hey, you're preparing really well, but just FYI, it's still going to be rough. It's still going to be tough." And the not even to mention the guys who didn't transition voluntarily and who are just thrust into this new world without any time to prep or prepare. And um, you're exactly right, Terry. I mean, it's a big shift, and when we're cops, our minds are geared toward one direction, and it's hard to switch it off. The situational awareness, the, hey, I'm off Tuesday, Wednesday, so or the all the crappy days off that we have, and all of the stuff that we deal with, the extra jobs, and all the stuff. And then when you transition to the corporate world, it's just all that. It's like a hard stop, you know, and maybe you're remote, maybe you're hybrid, maybe you're in office, you know, you can't tell the same stories, you can't tell the same jokes, your language has to change, your dress has to change, everything changes. And it can be a really, really rough beginning for a lot of people. And, just to kind of piggyback off what you said earlier, I'm using your word now. Um, you know, that's where talking to people really comes into play, because you know learning from others who have gone before you and saying, hey, what should I be prepared for? What are some things that I haven't thought about yet that I should start thinking about? What are some things that I can do to better prepare my mind and my body and my family for this new transition that I'm about to undergo? That is so important. And it's still going to be rough. It's still going to be a it's still going to be a tough experience, but there are some things that you can do to mitigate how much pain you have to go through.
Well, sleep patterns, that's a perfect example. I worked 1 to 11. I'd go work out afterwards. And if I work out, I'd go jog for 30 minutes. I call that a workout. But I mean, you know, um, but I'd come home, midnight, go to bed, 12:30 ish, you know, maybe a little bit earlier than that. Uh, Eric, if I went to bed at 12:30, I'd be dying in the morning. I mean, like I mean, like, somebody's gonna have to, like, wrangle me out of bed. And those are things that you don't even think about. That's the type of stuff where you're like, wow, um, yeah. And you talked about command staff, during that transition, they go from being the top tier person in that organization to 99% of the time they are not the top tier person in that organization, at that role. that they move into. That's just hard. And doing that mind shift set. Um, but fortunately, like I work for an organization that I was able to baby step that through, and I had a lot of grace as I went through because they were still learning at the same time. That is not always the case, and if you don't have a company that's supportive, that is willing to help you work through that, you'll get through the honeymoon phase, and then a lot of times they'll just be out, and
Yeah.
that's a very common trend that I've seen too.
Yeah. Absolutely. You know, now that you've, been in the corporate world for almost 2 years, what is some advice that you would give to people who are either in the transition process currently or are considering it?
So some of the advice I would talk about is one, if you're working on a certification, um, that's fine, that's good, but make sure you know terminology. Talk to people that are inside the industry to understand terminology, and like we talked about before, make sure you've talked to somebody that has had to deal with similar family issues that you've had to deal with. Hey, if you're a single guy transitioning out, okay, you're not going to have to deal with that, deal with it in the same way that I did. But if you have a wife and kids or a spouse, and maybe you have a clan of kids, I don't know, maybe you have 6 or 7 kids, I don't know. But having those conversations with people that have been through it. Well, what was your biggest problem? Well, sleeping, or you something, those that smell, something smells, you're like, oh my gosh, it reverts you back to some situation you were in. It takes a while to get out of it. Mike Benton and I always kind of joke that it's almost like we have to beat the cop out of people.
Mm,
we we have to,
preach.
yeah, yeah. So it's almost like you have to beat the cop out of them to get them to understand. But if you're looking at certifications, make sure you understand terminology. Read stuff from ASIS, read stuff from ATAP, read stuff from CISA. There's all sorts of free courses that do like ICS. I don't know if you ever took the ICS
Oh
courses,
yeah.
but uh, yeah, so the ICS courses, you have people from Public Works there. You have people from Parks and Rec there. You have people from all over the place there. Don't sit with a bunch of cops. Go sit with that group and go talk to them, because what it's inevitably it's the cop huddle, or
Always.
whatever agency you work for. It doesn't matter whether it's your municipal law enforcement or your federal law enforcement. At GSX, it was really funny because I saw a group of people walking. I'm like, that's a Fed, that's a Fed, that's a Fed, because they're all huddled together.
Yep.
Yeah, and they're all wearing the USA, or the flag pin and all, which is totally fine. It's very easy to point out, but we instinctively want to stay within our comfort zone. That's why people
Mhm.
stay for 25 years. But we want to do the cop huddle. Go to some of those classes and go sit with people that are not cops. Go sit with
Yeah.
people that work for the fire department. Go sit with whoever, but venture out of your comfort zone just a little bit and interact with people. Go watch people on how many people interact with people on LinkedIn. You'll see the people that they'll send you a connection request, and you're like, oh, you haven't posted in a really long time, but you're connecting with me. In my mind, I'm like, yeah, that's going to be a hard no. But you can still follow, or whatever
Yep.
it is. But oftentimes it could be the person in law enforcement that just doesn't know. And
Hmm.
so, or it could be somebody trying to scrape your LinkedIn profile, whichever one. I mean, it could be
Yeah.
anyone. But those things are, I wish I would have known earlier, especially the LinkedIn stuff. LinkedIn is such a powerful tool, and you can connect with people all over the world. And we talked about it this offline beforehand, you just don't realize how many people are out there in security all over the world, that you can help or you can talk to. I mean, it's crazy, and they have similar experiences. And I mean, you'd never know until you have to deal with GDPR, so the government restrictions in Europe for privacy, or ITAR,
Hmm.
the government restrictions for um, thing. It's like the secured facilities. So
Right.
you don't know about that stuff. I mean, you go through it in certifications, but you talk to those people and you're like, holy crap, there is so much more to this. And you know, and it's moving to the US. So learning those types of things and reaching out to people. I mean, I wish I would have done a lot more of that sooner, but in law enforcement, I had this arrogance about me that I was like, "Oh, I don't need that." When in reality, that was me just being arrogant and being stupid in my own in ways, uh, not really realizing, not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And especially the last part is, you know, we all we all think that because of what we've done, that everyone recognizes the value. And that is just simply not the case for most jobs out there. Now, you might get lucky and you might interview with someone who's former law enforcement, maybe has a family member in law enforcement, and they have that, sense of context, if you will. But for most people out there, that simply does not exist. And, you know, you're going to have a really hard time convincing someone that you can do the job when your resume does not reflect that. And I couldn't agree more with all you said, Terry. And um, it's really cool doing all these podcasts because not only do you meet a lot of people, but you get a sense of how many people out there are more than willing to answer a message or a text message or a LinkedIn message and hop on a phone call with someone. You know, I can count on one hand over the past 5 years how many times someone has actually refused to help out or jump on a phone call and stuff like that. And I just want people who are listening into this or who will listen in that all you have to do is ask, and I know that's uncomfortable for some people, but so many of us are more than willing to hop on a phone call or give freely of ourselves if it means helping you out in whatever way that looks like. But you do have to take that first step.
And there's another part of that, Eric, too, is you and I both have full-time jobs. We definitely help people on the side and all that. Uh, but if we are messaging back and forth and then we randomly stop and then you don't hear back from us, hey, follow up.
Yeah.
It's not that we're not a recruiter trying to ghost you. It's that a lot of times, hey, life gets busy and we forget.
Yeah.
Um, and then you message them and be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, I totally forgot." And then you kind of finish up the conversation. Um, but if you don't hear from them and you're kind of in the middle of this conversation, give it a couple days, maybe give it a week or so, and be like, "Hey, I just want to follow up on this conversation, or are you okay, to do X, Y, or Z, or whatever it is." But oftentimes people are like, "Oh, I don't want to bother them. I don't. What are they going to think?" I'm like, what do you got to lose? You
Yeah.
got zero to lose and everything to gain.
Yeah. I tell that to everyone, like you have nothing to lose by reaching out, and if they say no or they don't answer, you haven't lost anything. You just move on to the next person. And I'll say that the one final thing is I have met hundreds and hundreds of people, and have built hundreds of relationships through the years through LinkedIn and just reaching out to someone. Obviously, from a time perspective, I can't maintain all of those as well as I would like, but LinkedIn and your ability to network and build relationships and just reaching out and asking for help can have such a profound impact on your life. And most of us don't even know what kind of impact that will bring. Maybe it's something short term, but maybe it's something long term. The value is simply immeasurable. And if there's anything that you get from this conversation, from my perspective, it would be just to reach out and ask. Reach out to Terry, reach out to myself, reach out to other people who have willingly given their time through podcasts, reach out to the people that, Terry mentioned, like Carlos, the corporate security translator, and others, because we are here and we're ready to help.
Yeah, and just kind of to finish up, when you follow up with people and then you keep the conversation going, it doesn't mean that you have to message them twice a week or anything like that. But for example, we were kind of talking about GSX. If you're at GSX, what are you doing? Hey, are you going to GSX? You know, you, you could start conversations off like that. Oh no, I'm not. But I'm doing X, Y, and Z. And you never know what the experience of that person's going to be and how you can impact their lives, because you don't know what's going on in those other people's lives. You
Yeah.
don't know. You have no idea. You have no idea if those people are having marriage struggles. You have no idea if they're having mental health struggles. You have no idea if they're having work struggles. And you just reaching out and talking to them, you never know what type of impact you can have on somebody, regardless of whether you're the person in the corporate security side or whether you're the person in the law enforcement side. You could be a commander of 35 years or an officer that's like, hey, I've been doing this for a couple of years, but I think something else is going on. You just never know what impact you can have on people, and that's truly what the goal is to have an impact, whether you're in law enforcement, military, federal agent, municipal, parking control, animal control, or whether you're an overseas operator that's going and doing some ninja stuff that I can't even fathom.
Man, I don't know how to say it any better than that, brother. Words to live by. Terry, thank you so much for being willing to give of your time to participate in this podcast, and thank you just so much for sharing your story and your journey.
Hey, it's an honor. It was an honor to be on, and thanks a lot, Eric.
Absolutely, brother. Have a good night.
Hi, you too.